After e4, c6, knight c3, d5, knight f3. In this video we're going to go through this variation. Pawn takes and knight takes back, as we know. And now the early knight d7. This is to avoid the early knight f6, which, as you know, you can take and then pawn takes back. And that will give birth to a certain scenario that we've seen already many times. But in this video we're going to go to the early knight d7. This is because the knight wants to protect the other knight in f6, so that black can retain the knight in f6. The knight in f6 is very important. White goes on with bishop c4, and after knight g to f6, here now this is what we do. Knight to g5. The knight in e goes to g5. This is obviously placing an attack on f7. Bishop f7 is a threat of mate straight away. We're going to look at two main options that happen in this case. Either e6 or knight to d5. How do we take the game from there? e6 is the most logical move because it allows development of the bishop and it blocks the influence of our bishop over f7, and black is ready to play h6 to kick the knight away and not worry anymore. White continues with queen to e2, putting pressure on the weak pawn. We now have three attackers over this square, so something has to be done. Let's make an example. Bishop to d6, normal development, is already punished with knight f7. This is a fork attacking queen and rook. You're winning a lot of material. If king takes back, then you can take this with check. And obviously the king going to g6 would be a suicide, whereas the king going back to f8 allows queen checkmate in f7, obviously. So it looks like here the only option will actually be king to g6. But even then, queen f7 remains the right move. And now king going to the dark diagonal allows d4, development of the bishop. King going to f5, and then bishop check in e6, and this is how you take it. The only move here now is king to f4. But now you just simply open the bishop, right? So let's go from the start. Let's quickly recap. We familiarize with the patterns. Take, knight d7, bishop c4, knight f6, knight g5, already attacking. e6, we play queen e2, a lot of pressure. Bishop e7 is not very different from bishop to d6, because you're going to play knight f7 anyway. But still, king takes, and now queen check, and king to g6, bishop check, king has to go, let's say h6, and now queen e3 check, king goes here, and now queen g5, checkmate again. So in this position, black only has one move, which is, well, I mean, there's queen e7, and that's actually just fine. Let's go through knight to d5 instead of queen e7, and then we're going to go back to queen e7. But queen e7 blocks the bishop. That's the silly thing. We'll get there in a minute. Knight to d5 now. You play d4, okay? And after black plays h6, kicking away this incredible knight, knight to e4. That's the good thing about, remember, when the knight goes to d5 is that you have access to e4 with this knight without fearing the trade, because that's exactly what black wants. Black wants to trade pieces. Okay, bishop e7, developing. No other square was really accessible, because you will take. So castle, castle. Looks like this is going to be a normal game. However, after rook to e1, white is just much better. Let's look at two options. Let's say if black plays knight to b6, allowing development of the bishop, attacking our strong bishop here. Okay, bishop b3, a5, trying to trap the bishop, c4, attacking the opponent knight and having a shelter for the bishop. So let's make an example. If the knight goes back to c7, the game continues with bishop to c2, and this is a much better position for the white player, because it's going to allow us to play queen d3, then threaten of knight f6 check with the queen going to h7, and black cannot place the knight in f6 anymore. These two knights are out of the game. So in this position, if instead of knight c7 the knight goes to f6, you take. Bishop takes, bishop c2, same plan. And now it's really difficult for our opponent to stop all of our threat, because queen d3, queen e4 idea of going to h7 cannot be met with g6, because bishop takes pawn in h6. We know that. Pushing the pawn is not possible. You've got too many attackers. This knight is not playing the game anymore. He can't move anywhere. So after bishop e7 with the idea of knight d7 and knight f6, where the knight will be very well placed, bishop f4. And after knight to d7, trying to go back to f6, rook a to d1. Our opponent has been playing the only moves to save himself from checkmate threat. And these are not just silly basic player checkmate threats. These are threats that force our opponent to play these moves. If not, you're winning a lot of material. Knight f6 now. Queen to d3. Bishop to d7, developing. Okay, knight e5. Threatening to win the bishop pair. Bishop e8, saving it. Okay, h3. The idea is to play the g pawn and smash the king side. Our opponent really doesn't have any access to the king side with the queen, so these pieces will be kind of useless, and the knight cannot be replaced from that square. Bishop d6 doesn't really work because it's the kind of move where you can take back with the bishop, and then you're attacking the knight. You're threatening to take the knight, and it's going to happen no matter what. With the threat of mate, our opponent will lose a piece. Let's look. h5. Does it stop our plan? No, because g4 is coming no matter what. If take, the knight is defending the pawn, and you can push g5. If g6, okay, well, bishop to h6 traps the rook, and this is a fantastic position to play. So let's go from the start and familiarize even more. Let's go look at another variation. Knight d7, bishop c4, knight f6, knight g5, e6, queen e2. Okay, we're looking at the knight d5 move. d4, and after h6, kicking away the knight, knight e4 is now accessible. Okay, so now black plays bishop e7 developing, castle, castle. And now rook e1. So earlier we went through knight b6 and everything that happens. In this case, we're going to go through b5. This is important because the opponent is deciding to keep the knight close to the f6 square where it needs to be. So here in this case, you might wonder, okay, what's going to happen now is after bishop d3, knight to b4 can forcefully win our bishop. That's fine. Bishop f4, develop, keep developing. Knight takes, queen takes back. Knight f6. That's fine. Knight to e5, attacking the square c6. Really important. If we get to go there with an easy street. Queen to b6, developing and defending. Rook a to d1. Rook to e8, putting the rook on the right square. That's fine. Because it's too late. Bishop to h6. Haha. We want a crucial pawn because this cannot be taken back. If that happens, then queen to g3 check. King to f8. Queen to f4. Going for h6. Best move now according to the engine is rook to d4. But still, queen h6 check. King e8 is met with queen h8. That's going to be it. It's an easy continuation from here. If instead black plays king to g8, then knight to g6 is another sacrifice. Hehe. I'm going to keep laughing every time white just throws a piece. Because it feels good. Okay, now we're threatening queen to h8, so pawn takes back the knight, but then queen check. King moves, knight to g5. Is the sadistic way to end this game. Right, two quick mentions before we close this video. Take, and now knight d7, bishop c4, knight f6. We're looking at, okay, well, knight g5, and now we're looking at e6, queen e2, knight to d5, and we said we're just gonna play d4, h6, knight e4. What if black just plays knight d2, f6, and finally tries to trade with this strong knight in e4, and then puts the knight back in f6, and carry on with the boring game. Knight takes back, and now bishop to d2. Development, bishop d6, knight to e5. And white is just better. The position is just better. If black castles now, because, you know, what else can the opponent do? But the moves here are always the same. Bishop d3 in case you get attacked, and c3 can support the pawn. You play bishop c2, queen d3. You're going for this type of threat. Bishop. You play, as we saw before, h3, g4, g5. You're going to castle long. Right now, position is evaluated +2 out of the opening. The reason is simple. It looked like black did calm down our initiative by managing to force a trade, but it cost him too many tempos to do so. Let's start an attack. b5. Fine, bishop d3. Okay. What else to play? There's not much to play here. Queen to b6, maybe attacking this pawn, preparing a5, a4, and so on. g4. And now, no matter what, we will be able to play the pawn to g5, take with the bishop. If not, we take the knight. If bishop takes our knight, then take back. Knight d5. Queen e4. White is winning a lot of material. So if we take it from the start, let's quickly mention the other idea, but these are not as good, obviously, as the previous ones. Okay, knight d7, bishop c4, knight f6, knight g5, e6, queen e2. What if queen goes to e7 to stop our strong threats in f7? Okay, d4, h6 attacking the knight, knight to h3. This looks like the best for black, but the problem is, how is the black player going to develop the bishop? Let's look at this idea, g5, threatening to win a piece and allowing fianchetto and then castling. Okay, knight e5. Bishop g7, fianchettoing, f4. Double attack on g5. So after g4 attacking the knight, knight f2. There's a lot of attack over g4. So, h5. Castle. Castle. And now a4. Preventing b5. So if a6 now to be able to play b5. Because there's nothing else to do actually. There's literally no other moves that make sense for the black player. White now plays h3. Now we're going to be able to take this, and then when the queen infiltrates, it's going to, the game is going to play itself. If g3 attacking the knight, simply remove the knight, knight to d3, you're doing absolutely fine. Position evaluated almost as if white was up a piece. Okay, let's look at something else now before we close this video. Why do I say we close this video? I'm the one that is closing it, not you. Pawn takes back, knight takes back, and then knight d7, bishop c4, knight f6, and now knight g5. What happens if black doesn't play e6, but rather plays knight d5 straight away? Not much difference. Anyway, we castle. And after h6, knight e4. So remember, the knight d5 move is always met with knight e4, because the knight is no longer in f6. Now, the reason why we're looking at these variations is that now black can play e6 without having to run into that problem with queen e2 threats of knight f7 and so on. So the black player decided to first play h6 to kick away our knight, because the knight was putting pressure on f7, and now we don't have that queen e2 type of idea. Okay, that's fine. Before we look at that, let's look at this move, by the way, f5, to attack the knight. This is rubbish, because so you might argue, okay, the knight has to move again, and it's kind of getting ugly. But this loses, because knight h4 straight away attacking g6, attacking queen h5. This is really bad. Taking the knight here loses the game, because obviously this is mate. So the black player plays queen to c7, allowing an escape for the king, but now knight to g3 puts double attack on this, and we should win material. g6 cannot happen to defend the pawn because the knight's attacking it. So in this position, what happens after? Okay, f5 is really stupid. e6. Okay, d4. And now knight 7 to f6, take. And we're gonna go through take back with the knight. Taking back with the queen is not very good. Let's mention this, because now rook to e1. And after the development, let's say bishop d6, bishop goes all the way to f1. Castle, and now c4. So now you understand why bishop f1. The thing is, the problem with this queen f6, remember the patterns and the ideas, not the moves. Don't memorize moves. The knight wants to be in f6. So if black takes the square f6 with the queen, it's depriving the knight of playing that move. So what you do is retreat the bishop, play c4, the knight will have to move, but now the knight loses the possibility to go to f6 ever again. And since we do have the light square bishop and the queen on the board, we're going to make threats on this strong diagonal. So two squares now, either knight b4 or knight f4. We're going to be looking at knight to f4. Seems really good, but now bishop to d2 develop, rook e8 develop, g3 attack the knight. The knight can't go to h3 because of the bishop, which is in f1, very important. Knight to g6, bishop to c3, with all the threats of the world. d5 is a very strong move. Queen back to d8, h4. And after h5, the game is compromised forever. If black plays h5 to stop us, then knight to g5. We have an attack on h5. This is unstoppable. So in this position, what if knight to b4 instead of knight to f4? It's fine. Black is still in trouble. a3. Only move is knight a6. Bishop to d2. Bishop to d7. Develop. c5. Attacking the bishop. The bishop goes c7. Okay, queen to b3 comes now and attacks the square in b7. Vulnerable pawn. Rook a to b8. Rook a to d1. Rook f to e8. Developing. Bishop to c3. This was going to happen. Queen to g6 in order to avoid d5 and potentially d6. Queen to g6 looks like a very good move, but now knight e5 just wins it. If bishop takes, pawn takes back, knight to c5 looks like it wins a pawn for the black player, but instead you play queen c4 attacking the knight. The knight's got nowhere that makes sense to go to. Also because the knight is defending the bishop, so the rook will be taking the bishop, so that doesn't work. What happens after b6? b4, that's it. So in this position, after knight taking f6, let's not go anymore through queen f6 because it's bad. It deprives the black player from the possibility to take the knight in f6 with the knight. So, okay, now we go on with knight e5. Bishop e7, c3 supporting that pawn, castle, queen f3. This is how you continue this. So of course you have to protect this pawn here with the pawn because otherwise queen d4, that pawn is not poisoned and you're losing. Queen f3 here. Queen to b6. Okay, and now queen to h3. To put more pressure on h6. The queen is excellently placed. If, let's make an example. Let's say black plays a5, right? Any move, right? Here, that's the plan. You're going for bishop takes. Okay, pawn takes. Queen takes. And now what? If black, I don't know, moves the rook. Let's say rook there to d8. Rook a to e1. The idea is to very simply involve the rooks into the game. That's it. Bishop to f8, defending. Okay, then we have to take the knight. This is the best idea for black to give up material again. Queen to c7, try to get into the game. Too late. Rook e3. The game plays itself, or I should say speaks for itself, to quote one of the luminaries of modern chess. You know who I'm talking about. Anyway, in this position, if instead of rook d8, what if queen to d8? Okay, well, f4. That will do. The idea is simple. Queen to d8, the idea is to remove the knight and then the bishop can go to g5 attacking our queen. So f4 stops that. Rook to e8. Rook to f3. Bishop f8 just doesn't make it in time because you're playing rook to g3. So in this position, we mentioned how any move, let's say a5 or whatever, right? You're going for this plan. So what happens if black plays h5 himself? To stop that. Okay, bishop g5, the idea of taking the knight. That's it. Rook to d8, best moves. Now nothing works because f4. c5, I try to undermine the center. Queen maybe taking d4 would be excellent. Take the knight. Bishop takes back. And now queen takes the pawn in e5. This is a very strong position. Bishop takes knight is not advisable because you take back. And now you have the queen attack on f7. It's completely winning position. So if instead of that our opponent doesn't do that and plays g6 attacking our queen, sacrifice knight g6, pawn takes. Oh, and by the way, if pawn doesn't take and plays pawn takes in d4, threatening discover check or something, you just play knight back to e5, and now you're threatening to reach the square f7 once again. So let's assume that our opponent will take back, queen takes back. Bishop blocks, f5 with the threat of f6. We're also threatening to take this pawn. So if rook f8, f6 still. This is the best way to continue.